Started as it is 4:15. Welcome to our series, Calm, Connected, and Effective, a trauma-informed perspective for teachers. Today's webinar is the second of the series, Connect. So we'll talk about a trauma-informed, restorative, and relational teachers. My name is Andrea Rosenberg. I work for Mercy Home for Boys and Girls. I'm the manager of Mercy Model in Schools, which I'll talk a little bit about our programming later. I'm a former teacher, so a lot of my experiences that I'll talk about today come from that teaching experience, but also my experiences with the youth at Mercy Home, working directly with them, which I did for a few years. My co-presenter here today is Brittany Terrell. Really excited for her to bring her perspective on restorative justice. Brittany, you want to introduce yourself?
Yes. My name is Brittany Terrell. I'm a supervisor of the Academy at Mercy Home. I've been here for about 8 years. As far as restorative justice goes, I go to any training regarding restorative justice. It is also very near and dear to me because I am an advocate for dismantling the school-to-prison pipeline, and that is what restorative practices around Chicago have been trying to do for a couple years now. So very, very passionate about the subject itself, very passionate about teaching teachers new skills to use in the classroom.
Yeah, so we're excited to have Brittany here to kind of bring the restorative justice perspective. We'll all kind of be bringing the trauma-informed lens to today's webinar. So thanks so much for joining us as people kind of come in. Just a few housekeeping things. You've joined in listen-only mode, so we can't hear you, but we will ask you throughout our time possibly to raise your hand. So find on your dashboard there how you can raise your hand, and why don't you go ahead and raise it just so I can kind of see everyone. So go ahead and raise your hand. I see a few coming up here. Awesome. Got a few more. All right, so if you raise your hand, thanks. I can put everyone's down. So we'll do that a few times. We also will have you answer in the questions box or the chat. So go ahead and find that questions box, because we'll have you participate via that way. Also, I may be typing kind of reminders or housekeeping things through the chat, and so you can kind of connect with us if you're having trouble of hearing or whatnot. This will be available. Thanks, Rick, for your question. Will be available as a recording. We send out the recording. It takes us a few days to put together, so we'll send out the recording in the beginning of next week, as well as the PowerPoint and some handouts. And so you can access the recording that way. Feel free to ask questions throughout, and we will try to get to them. If we don't, then we'll bring them up at the end. So we're going to go ahead and get started. We want to start by talking just a little bit about Mercy Home for those of you who haven't been on a webinar with us before. Mercy Home was established in 1887 as an orphanage for homeless boys. We're a drastically different place now. We're a residential treatment facility. We have 2 campuses that houses boys and girls, ages 11 to 24, and we serve about 134 youth at a time, which is about between 700 and 900 youth a year. We provide them with individual therapy, group therapy, family therapy, as well as academic and career supports. I work on the administrative part of Mercy Home, which is located on the boys campus, or our West Loop campus. Brittany works on our girls campus, our Walsh campus, which is in the Beverly Morgan Park neighborhood. We tell you this because if you're working directly with students, which I know many of you probably are, we're a good referral source if you have students who are really struggling in your classroom and possibly struggling at home. We provide them with milieu therapy as well as the group therapies that I mentioned that is kind of within our Mercy model of care. Our Mercy model of care we share with schools through our work, our program that's called Mercy Model in Schools. That's a program that I run, and I go to schools to present information like I do on this webinar. We also hold events and, of course, the webinars. And these all aim to really inform school environment and culture and really give staff in schools the skills to foster an environment that all students can learn in, and in particular, those who have been impacted by trauma and adversity. So I mentioned our Mercy model of care. This is our interpretation for educators. So it's kind of how we bring what Mercy Home does in our residential facility into schools. I'm not going to go kind of over it in a really complete way, but I want you to see the visual and kind of see the different levels. So at our foundation of our house, so the house kind of represents Mercy Home or the school environment. At the foundation are foundations of care, thinking about how are we creating an environment and preparing staff to help the students who come to us be able to develop the skills that they need to live in the world in an effective way. Oftentimes, students are coming to us with a trauma history or with some adversity, and that can make living in school and things more difficult for them. And so the next level of our house is really thinking about how are we forming relationships with them. And that's what our webinars are based on, is this idea of calm, connected, and effective. The next level is regulation and then competence. So these are kind of, we teach these in schools and thinking about how are students regulating their emotions physically and emotionally, and then thinking about how can we give them the skills to feel like they can operate in the world and through challenges that they might come to. With our kind of end result and our roof being, we want students to feel resilient and have personal fulfillment. This means their ability to kind of bounce back through the challenges they might face. We have students right now in our classrooms and at Mercy Home who are facing challenges, but sometimes not that effectively. Sometimes they're getting thrown out of class or being suspended, and that's not really effective for their learning. And so how can we get them some skills so that they can be more effective? And our approach is also that our caregivers, teachers, parents also need to be effective, and so they can teach these skills to the young people in their lives. So the goal of today's webinar is really to focus on that connection piece. The webinar in January really focused on the calm piece. If you were here with us, we talked about mindfulness and kind of staying in our rational brains. Today's webinar, the goals will be to understand the relationship between connection and discipline. We'll learn some verbal and nonverbal ways to reach hard-to-reach students. We'll discuss classroom examples of using connection during behavioral interventions. And at the tail end, we'll make a plan to connect with a student who presents increasing challenges in your classroom. So that'll kind of be, that last one will kind of be your takeaway, the what to do, what you're going to do with this tomorrow. We like to give teacher strategies for kind of the next step right away. So as we get going, really we want to look into this question of what is the relationship between connection that I have with my students and their relationships and discipline. And we're going to look at this from the trauma perspective and the restorative justice perspective. So from the trauma perspective, we know that students may be coming to us with some trauma and an experience of traumatic events, some adversity, or possibly complex developmental trauma. The reason why I bring this up is because when a student has experienced some complex developmental trauma, it's occurred within the context of a relationship, of a caregiving system. And so this becomes really key because we see that students then really struggle with relationships with other adults or other peers. And so it's even more important that we form a positive, safe relationship with our students, especially the ones who have experienced trauma, but obviously all students. And this really lays the foundation for discipline and our ability to teach them. So Brittany, share a little bit about how this relationship relates to the restorative justice perspective.
As it relates to restorative justice, as you can see the bullet points here, focuses on harm in the community. So this is not just about the person or the offender who actually did what's going on. It's about focusing on the harm that they did to themselves, as well as the person who was directly affected, as well as the community. So we have to understand that it's a three-portion part to this. Also addressing the responsibilities of those who harm and the community. So what was the response? Who was responsible? How are we holding people accountable, but in a way that does not include punishing? Using a collaborative process. So when I think about collaborative process, I think about things like peace circles and things like that include the offender, might include the family, the principal, maybe the dean, but it's a collaborative process to provide that support. Involves the whole community, kind of goes into what I was saying prior, and then seek to repair harm and right the wrong. We are seeking to repair the harm. We are not seeking to punish anyone. So overall, we want to know kind of what happened, how did we get here, and then how do we go forward?
Awesome. So let me flip my slide here. So, and then like we decided that this would be kind of a nice quote to include.
Absolutely. So take relationships seriously, envisioning yourself in an interconnected web of people, institutions, and the environment. And that is from The Little Book of Restorative Justice by Howard Zer.
Yeah, which we brought along today.
Yes.
I received this at a restorative justice workshop that I went to. That's been really helpful, and it's included as our sources because we used it a few times for some references. So knowing that, right, we know from the trauma-informed perspective that that relationships are really important with students because of their trauma history. And then we know that because of how we run kind of discipline, that becomes also important. So now what I want you to think about is, what is the goal of responding to student behavior? And I want you to write that in the chat. So think to yourself, what is my goal when I respond to student behavior? All right. So let's see who we've gotten to respond. And I actually forgot. I think we actually have a poll for this one. So let's see. Okay, so we have ensuring student safety. Great. What else might be our goal? Teach a new skill. Absolutely. For them to understand why their behavior was unsafe. Yeah, so these are all good answers. Getting students to understand what kinds of changes need to be made. Absolutely. Diana, we want to think a little bit, the trauma-informed perspective definitely includes these things, especially teaching a new skill. And so we want to think a little bit through the trauma lens. We really think about the goal of responding to student behavior as to create a predictable and safe environment, which I know many of you mentioned safety in yours, right? And the other piece, which you also mentioned in your responses, was building those developmental skills. So how can my adult responses, right, and appropriate adult responses to student misbehavior not only create a predictable and safe environment, but also help build developmental skills? And that's kind of a big weight just for responding to students, but we think like having this goal in mind is really important because oftentimes it will change what our next steps are. So Brittany, what's the goal from a restorative justice lens?
So as you can see here, the goal is an opportunity for learning, to encourage reflection and creating a culture of awareness and understanding and sharing. We really want to see instances of wrongdoing as an opportunity for learning. A student can act out behaviorally and you're thinking to yourself like, oh my God, why are they doing this? But they might not know. So creating the opportunity to learn kind of what's beneath the behavior, what's going on with them, asking questions like what happened? How did it happen? What can we do to make it right? Through these discussions, this kind of reflective work, we gain a better understanding of how to fix the damage, what exactly the extent of the damage is, and kind of how we get the student to reflect and repair on the damage that was done.
So really, like, oftentimes trauma-informed and restorative justice really like go together. We kind of live under the same umbrella because of this purpose of like teaching skills. So thinking about like a slightly different perspective, but like the end goal being students having the skills to kind of be able to do this better in the future. So like then we start thinking about, okay, if our goal of discipline is really to create the safe space, to be teaching them skills, giving them opportunities for learning. So what can our responses look like? And really like through my perspective, we think about cooperate, don't compete. So there are a lot of responses I could give students that might just exert my control, right? Might just show them that I'm in charge, you need to sit down. This is the real power dynamic here, right? Or I might ask for some compliance. I might kind of just yield to their desire or demand. I just want them, I'm gonna do whatever I can, use threats possibly, or any type of power just to get them to comply, which maybe as a short-term goal sounds good, but really if our goal is learning, compliance doesn't really get us anywhere. Or we just exert our power, right? Our ability to kind of produce an effect. When our goal really, I wish I had a big red line to like cross some of those out. When our goal really is cooperation. If we can get students to cooperate with us and work together, that's going to be an environment where we can find opportunities for them to learn, where we can ensure safety. So just a little kind of like background on kind of where we're coming from. And now we kind of want to move into like, okay, so we want to get cooperation, but how do we like do that? So we like to talk about communicate with connection. So this comes from some of Dan Siegel's work in No Drama Discipline. And let me give you a few examples. So like you could easily say just what's on there, take a seat, right? Simple redirection. However, if I change my tone or how I connect with students, that's gonna sound a lot different. So I could say, take a seat, or why don't you take a seat? The slight change in tone may get me more cooperation. Let's try another one. I have a student who's acting out. I want them to go take a break. That's something we've installed in my classroom. I could say, go take a break. Or I could say, go take a break, right? I'm not even adding different words. Right. I'm just changing the tone of my voice. And in that, I'm changing how I'm saying something. So the last one, give me that, right? They're playing with something. Give me your headphones. Give me whatever's in there. How could I change that to, right, change my tone a little bit? Why don't you give me that? I'll give it back. So I like Dan Siegel's quote here. Children usually cooperate much more quickly if they feel connected to us. And when we engage them in a pleasant and playful exchange, the how determines that. We can be much more effective disciplinarians if our how is respectful, playful, and calm. And oftentimes when I'm working one-on-one with a teacher, we talk about this a lot. It's not necessarily what teachers are saying, it's how they're saying it. And so how can we get them to be a little bit more pleasant and playful? And oftentimes we get that in return from students. Sometimes we won't, but it oftentimes generates a little more cooperation from them if we're more respectful, more playful, and calm. So from the restorative lens, slightly different kind of language we're using for communication.
Mm-hmm. Restorative cultivates empathy. I think we talked a little bit about earlier the types of questions that we ask when people are in trouble or having some behavioral issues. Cultivate a space where they can feel like you are kind of empathizing with what's going on with them, creating a sense of hopefulness. So this is not the end all be all. You shouldn't approach the situation like you're in trouble, this is it, this is done. And so if we do that, we kind of cultivate a sense of hopelessness within the kids. So we want to create a sense of hopefulness. Equip participants with tools for dialogue, reflection, and enhanced communication. Again, this is a teaching. We are teaching not only math and science, but we are teaching life skills. So if you cultivate the empathy, you create a sense of hopefulness, you use humor, or you build relationship, you are really directly enhancing their communication skills through life. You are enhancing the opportunity for them to use these skills in their communities and in their homes. Another way to do so is losing a little bit of the power with how we set behavior standards in class. So even at the beginning of your classrooms, set rules for the class, but have the students participate. And you'll be surprised. A lot of students, they might create more rules that you didn't even think about. You're like, whoa, that's a lot. But that way it helps with accountability. The classroom created these rules, not me. So when something goes wrong, you can say, hey, Timothy, you're the one that said, students need to raise their hands before they talk. So classroom discussions can be held to set behavior standards rather than teachers prescribing rules of conduct. Students are kind of given the opportunity to explore and determine how to create their own little positive community.
And that really goes back to that cooperation, right?
Absolutely.
If we're working together to form a community, then we're going to allow everyone to speak to the rules that we're expecting.
Absolutely.
And that is a really direct way to communicate with students, like how I'm going to be setting up my classroom. That's not just the tone of my voice or the volume, but like a direct way of communication. So those are great examples, Brittany. Thanks for bringing those in.
Thank you.
All right. So we've talked about, right, what's the goal of discipline, kind of creating these opportunities for students to learn, to building skills. How we've touched on a little bit about how we do this. We'll touch more on it, the how in the March webinar, the last one of the series, but we want to get to some classroom examples. I find these really helpful in training because it kind of lets us digest kind of what this looks like in the classroom, and we'll kind of interpret these as a group. So our first example, our first case study is Kenny. So Kenny comes to school most days irritated, disgruntled, and with an attitude. He is easily set off by peers and teachers. Some days he aggressively responds when anyone talks to him in the morning. So go ahead and raise your hand if you know of any Kennys in your school. There's often a few. Go ahead and raise your hand if you know of any Kennys. Yep, I'm seeing some hands go up. Absolutely. I've known some Kennys in my day. Absolutely. Right, so we don't always know what the background is, but we want to share a little bit to kind of get our brains thinking what might be going on in Kenny's past, right? So this is what's going on. Kenny experienced multiple traumas throughout his life. As an infant, he was often woken up by the sound of his parents arguing. His father was verbally and physically abusive to Kenny and his mother. When Kenny was 7, his father moved out of the home, and subsequently Kenny's mother struggled with depression and paying the bills. Kenny went to 3 different elementary schools, and their current home is in a violent neighborhood. So think for a moment, like, kind of what is Kenny struggling with? We may see that, like, he's struggling with the routine of coming into school. He's struggling through a trauma perspective, like regulating his emotions. through restorative justice, it might be like how he's communicating his emotions. It's not that we care that he's irritated or disgruntled. That's human emotion, but how is he communicating these things? So that was kind of a quick kind of picture into what's going on with Kenny. Now we're going to give you a few minutes, a minute or two, to read what his interaction with his teacher looks like. And write in the chat, what does Miss S do to connect with Kenny? I'm going to give you a minute or two here. All right, so we have some people responding. Remember, you are writing in the chat, what does Miss S do to connect with Kenny? I've identified about 5 or 6 things. You can write 1 or 2 things. Give people about another 30 seconds to finish up. Yeah, so if you're writing your answers in the questions box, that's perfectly fine. Sorry, sometimes I call it a chat. So we have a few people who have responded. So one person, Juanita, you recognize this check-in sheet, right? So this is a really important, something that Brittany talked about in terms of skill building. Miss S kind of identified what is going on with Kenny, might be difficult identifying his emotions. That's how one of the strategy that Miss S uses. Diana, you recognize that she empathized with him. Absolutely, right? She validated his concern and kind of normalized it. Mm-hmm. And Megan, you said she connected with Kenny's grumpiness, right? This validation. Yeah. Brittany, did you see anything else in here that she did that was helpful?
I think the biggest part already came up, which was cultivating the empathy.
Absolutely.
Because once you do that, you let the defense mechanism down immediately. It's especially important how you approach the situation initially. It's hard to approach it aggressively at first and then try to come back. She approached it initially from an empathetic viewpoint, and so he's probably going to be more likely to try to build that relationship with her and let her know what's going on.
Absolutely. Some things that we want to identify for people is that she noticed the pattern. Mm-hmm. So this didn't just happen one time, right? It says after several mornings that he comes in grumpy, then she decides to do this intervention. And she doesn't approach him in the morning. This is like from a regulation perspective, is he's grumpy in the morning. So if she approached him in the morning, it may have not been as successful, right? Exactly. She approaches him at lunch and then is able to show him a little empathy, right? In the morning, he may have not been able to see that. Mm-hmm. She also uses a really non-judgmental statement and says, I wonder what could work for you, right? It's really kind of just neutral. She's not saying, why are you struggling this? What could you do about this, Kenny? Right? But she uses that. We don't know how exactly she says this, but just the way she's phrased it, the how seems pretty good. Mm-hmm. Seems pretty good. And I like, Megan, you mentioned in your responses, she gave him options, right? The choice is really important here. She's giving him agency. Oftentimes in restorative practices, we do that too. We give them agency, but you say you don't let them off the hook, right? So there is a discipline approach here, but it's skill-based. Mm-hmm. So we're going to respond in some way, but it's not punishment. There's a real big difference there, right, Brittany?
Yes, absolutely. We want to respond in a way that restores justice. We want to respond in a way that is not punishing, even like I said initially, which is extremely important. The initial communication is going to set the tone for how you guys communicate from there on out.
Absolutely. And so thinking about, some people would say, well, this doesn't really seem like discipline. And I would say, well, we're teaching him skills. Absolutely. That's really the root of discipline, right? Absolutely. We're keeping everyone safe. That's the root of discipline. But sometimes adults, like, we need to feel like maybe a slight harm has been done to our classroom, so they then feel harm. Yeah. And that's when the power dynamics get funny, and when we start to focus on our power instead of teaching. So, right, Kenny is a difficult student to connect with, right? Besides the intervention, what else should Miss S do to build a relationship with him? And so her intervention could be successful. So think for a moment and write in your question box, what advice would you give to Miss S? If you were coaching Miss S, or if you were her principal, if you're just like another co-teacher, right? How could Miss S kind of do some other preventative things that might help him get going? All right, so from kind of a trauma-informed perspective, we might ask Miss S, if we are coaching her, to maybe use some nonverbals with him, right? Give him a smile, give him a high five. Liz mentioned in her response, like, take 2 minutes out of the morning to connect with him. Right on. Be sure to follow through. I like this. Juanita, give him consistency and safety to trust her, right? If Kenny chooses, we don't know what Kenny chooses in this case study. If he chooses to do the check-in sheet, if he doesn't do it the first day, I'm not going to give up.
Absolutely.
I'm going to be persistent and consistent with him. Thank Kenny for his service to the class via his class job. I love it. We have a few suggestions. So these nonverbal strategies I started to talk about, right? These are really simple to do, and sometimes they're really small, but it goes into that how, right? How am I conveying and communicating with students? So just a high five in the morning. I might put a sticker on his paper, right? This is a little more of an elementary example. We'll give some high school. The next case study is more high school. I'm gonna make eye contact with him, not prolonged eye contact, but I'm gonna give him a positive head nod. When I talk to him, I might lean in a little bit, not invading his personal space, but really showing that I'm caring, showing that some of those empathetic listening skills. Those are just really simple things that we can do for students that we're kind of having trouble with connecting. Some body language stuff. Other things that are pretty simple too are just try some verbal strategies. Liz, you mentioned just that morning hello and goodbye, right? That check-in. I might bring in some other non-school related things, right? So how was breakfast? Did you see the game last night? Tell them a little joke. Just, try to lighten the mood a little bit, especially if you then have to redirect him. I want to make that connection first.
Absolutely. Another thing with verbal strategies is if you notice a youth or a kid that always is wearing a certain thing or a certain color, or they seem to talk a lot about this certain celebrity, try to connect in that way, a way that they notice that you've noticed them before you even start the conversation. That will even open them up even more.
I love that. I had a teacher the other day tell me that she just noticed that a student had been really tired. And she was just like, I just noticed that you've been really tired. Are you feeling okay? And the student kind of like lit up a little bit. And this was kind of a strategy of like, hey, I'm noticing you. Like, I see you, right? And that goes a long way to generating some of that empathy between you two and building that relationship that then helps when you want to intervene. They're going to feel like they're going to be more cooperative.
Absolutely.
So our second scenario is more of a high school scenario for those of you who teach high school, maybe middle school, it could definitely apply to. But we have Fernanda. So Miss W instructs the class and then assigns each student to complete a project that will take several days. Fernanda sits at her computer and starts talking to the student next to her. Fernanda has not turned on her computer to get the assignment started. So this scenario is a little bit different. We're going to do kind of option 1 and option 2, see how they kind of diverge, and then we're going to kind of compare them through trauma and lens and then through the restorative justice lens. So scenario 1, a little bit longer. So go ahead and read through this. In the question box, go ahead and tell me, is Miss W successful? What do her nonverbal and verbal messages convey to Fernanda? So we're really putting you to work here, but go ahead and read that for us. Give you about another minute. So why don't you raise your hand if you feel like she's successful, and then tell us what you feel like her nonverbals and verbals convey to Fernanda in the question box. All right, we're seeing some hands go up. You think that Miss W was successful? Great, I think almost all of you are saying that you feel like she was successful. All right, so then think about, okay, what are her nonverbals and verbals conveying to Fernanda? All right, so Megan, you think she's successful, and that because she's showing that she cares about her by holding her to the same standard. So, right, it's kind of that warm demander that like, I'm going to be warm and caring, but I'm also going to hold you to the expectation. Absolutely. Diana says that she's kind of, walking around checking in, right? She's not just checking in on Fernanda, but she's paying attention to her.
Mm-hmm.
She's giving her a verbal choice, but giving her ownership. Liz, absolutely giving her time and space to make a choice. Really like a great strategy. Oftentimes when we just tell students to do things and just stand and look at them, then it becomes a power situation instead of a cooperation. We're just looking for compliance at that point.
Mm-hmm.
But she's losing some power and allowing her opportunity to make some choice. Absolutely. Okay, so we think she was kind of pretty successful here. At least many of you had raised your hands. Now we have scenario 2. So go ahead and read scenario 2. It's a little bit shorter. And see what you feel about this. Raise your hand if you feel like she is successful in this one. So for scenario 2, raise your hand if you feel like she's successful here. And then in the question box, write what do you think her nonverbals and verbals are conveying. All right, we're not seeing a lot of hands go up.
Which is good.
Which is good. We agree with you. But what is she conveying here? What is Miss W conveying here? This is a little bit rougher of an example.
Mm-hmm.
All right, her tone of voice is not showing a caring attitude towards the students. We definitely agree that just the tone, I think you're right, Diana, and how she's projecting it, her volume. Also, she's across the room,
yes,
shouting her out, kind of shaming her, possibly. Fernanda, I don't see you on your computer. What else? What concerns you in this example, Brittany?
Oh, everything. What concerns me, I guess, most in this example is that she is the shaming piece. So the yelling from across the room. A lot of kids shut down in instances of redirection when it's public.
Right.
You'd be surprised how many kids will give you a completely different reaction if you were closer to them or you pull them to the side. Also, she is definitely in a power struggle with her here. She wants to kind of show her like that I'm the boss, and that's something you definitely don't want to get into with your students. She told her, fine, you'll take a 0 for today. She had no concern about like what possibly was going on with Fernanda and why she was not active on her activity for whatever it was that day. So just no concern, disrespect, and didn't really give her a chance to get into what's beneath the behavior.
Absolutely. I mean, Megan made a good point in her comment that she actually, Miss W escalated the situation and then checked out, and how that really shows Fernanda that this is just power.
Yep.
This is simply about power, that Miss W has the power. She kind of displays that and saying, fine, you'll take a 0.
It's almost like she's showing her power off, in front of Fernanda's peers, which students never respond positively to.
Yeah. So let's kind of talk about the difference between the two approaches. The biggest difference, I would say, in Miss W's approaches that we're seeing, and with the students the teachers that we're working with, is thinking about their tone, thinking about how they're approaching. Brittany said it perfectly, that public versus private is really important. And we know that it's not always possible, but when I always like to see teachers make an attempt to do it privately, or at least non-verbally in front of a group, before they do it publicly. The long-term effect, I think, on the relationship is really important here, right? So Miss W in the second one may have gotten compliance. She may have gotten Fernanda to start it. We don't really, well, no, I think it actually said she shut down. So she didn't even get compliance, right? But what is the long-term relationship? What is this going to look like the next day?
Absolutely.
Right? How is Fernanda going to respond the next day? And that becomes, maybe doesn't look so good, right? Fernanda's probably going to come in disengaged. She's probably not going to want to work on the project. And this is a long-term project that we needed to engage in. And from the beginning, Miss W just kind of isn't doing the connection. And so the discipline, she's thinking, well, if I just give her a 0, she's going to be motivated. That's going to motivate her possibly. But really, students are more motivated by relationship and connection than they are with like long-term goals.
Absolutely.
One of the things that we see with students who have experienced trauma is that they can't necessarily think about long-term goals. They're kind of thinking day to day, maybe because the chaos that they're living in, or that survival mode. But we motivate them through relationships and not through those kind of long-term kind of carrots, if you will. Anything, let's see, Brittany, I think you're gonna talk a little bit about kind of what some of the values in restorative justice that kind of come into play in this scenario.
Absolutely. I think I talked a little bit about this already, but respect. What does respect look like between a student and a teacher? It just means giving out what you would like to be reciprocated back to you. So if you want someone to talk to you in a tone and a cadence of respect, you should definitely do the same with your students. Responsibility. What is my responsibility in this situation? So think about it from the power standpoint, that you being the teacher, you already have the power. You don't need to try to exert that. So what is my responsibility in this situation? You really want the student to get the work done. You want the behavior management to be there. So what can I do to make sure all of this happens and not damage the relationship? Which we get to the last part, which is the relationship. What can I do to promote a positive relationship with my student? What can you do? Be empathetic. Non-blaming language is very important. Creating a culture in the classroom that promotes, safety, feeling emotionally safe in your classroom, encouraging reflection. So when things happen, like I said, what happened? How did we get here? And not blaming the student kind of for things that went wrong. I have a lot of youth that at Mercy Home who will be doing well in about 5 or 6 classes, and then this is one class, and I'm like, why are they not doing well in it? When I talk to them, they're like, I don't like the teacher, or the teacher doesn't like me. And I always just think like, that's ridiculous. But it shows. It shows that the relationship with the teacher is strained. And so they become disengaged in the classroom completely. And it's not because they're not capable. They're not comfortable. So making sure you cultivate positive relationships with your students at all times.
Absolutely. I think that's such a good point. We see that a lot and think about it from the teacher's perspective. The students that don't do well in our classes are sometimes the students we don't get along with.
Yeah.
And we're not going to get along with every single student, but how can we cultivate some of that mutual respect, some of that relationship of them that we can both enjoy to some point? It's really our responsibility as adults to really make the attempt. What do you think, Brittany? I think that sometimes teachers struggle with the respect of the students don't respect me. Sometimes you know what follows that. I won't respect them. Exactly. What would you tell? What would you tell a teacher that says that?
I would say just like they have to gain your respect, and they feel the same way about you.
Yeah.
You have to gain theirs as well. Just because they're younger does not mean that they don't deserve respect. And if you show that trust and you're building that relationship early on, they will give you that respect, believe it or not. And different teachers see different results in kids. I've seen teachers, I've gone to parent-teacher conferences, and these teachers are raving about the student, and I get to one teacher and they're like, I don't know why all of my cohorts are raving about this kid, because they are a mess in my classroom. But it's the relationship, it's the respect that the teachers give the students, and they give it right back. Absolutely.
So almost like if you're struggling with the students, like think about, like, if they're not respecting you, think about your relationship with them and how you can improve that.
Direct correlation.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's kind of what we'll go into next is, let's make a plan. So what I want to do is kind of take out your notepad that you have. We'll give you a form in the handouts next week, but like think about and identify a student who is having difficulty responding to your redirections, or you feel like doesn't respect you. Identify some ways that you can connect with them outside of the discipline conversations or intervention. Identify how you will approach them during a redirection or discipline moment, right? The how. Will you be calm and playful? What will your tone be? Really thinking about this purposefully can help our brains do it when we're in a state of crisis with a student. And as kind of our takeaway, what we want you to do is write in the question box one action item. Think of you have your student who you're struggling with, the one you kind of, like it's really tough when he shows up, right? Or when he or she shows up to school. Write in the chat one action item for each value of restorative justice that you will practice with your student. So Brittany, do you want to give some examples? Like, what are some things that you would do, like, to generate some respect with students?
Some things I would do to generate respect with students. I would say definitely, I just feel like a broken record with this, but the relationship is key. Me personally, I feel like you have to find your niche. Just in my family and my culture, my niche has always been humor. So I bring that to my students and the youth that I work with. I'm very funny with them, and that's how they kind of see me as a regular human being. You know, sometimes they don't see us as regular people. And sometimes it's okay to kind of let that guard down and let them see that. And I think that's where the respect will become reciprocated. They see you as kind of this person that I can actually talk to, this person that is not, way up here and I'm down here. And that's kind of what you want from younger people in order for them to respect you. We notice a lot that they respect their peers a lot. And they move a little bit different with their peers, but it's because they kind of see them as regular human beings, regular people, and they don't see them as these authoritative figures, or these people that have so much power over them. And a lot of times kids will respect you because they feel like you have that power, but some will retreat, and it just depends on their trauma history.
Absolutely. And Megan also mentioned that she might find, right, with her student, find something that you have in common.
Absolutely.
Right. And that, I feel like those respect and relationship we're finding go together.
Absolutely.
And how am I going to approach that? It's going to be, hey, notice you're always wearing that Bulls jersey, right? And my tone's going to be caring. My tone, how I'm doing it. And that's going to start that relationship with them.
Absolutely.
So we hope you're thinking about your student, whether it's someone, hopefully it's someone you're currently working with, and think about, right, what are you going to do in terms of responsibility? And responsibility, we think of, okay, well, what's my responsibility in this situation? In our first case study, Miss S, her responsibility was to approach the student, but also to bring her own ideas. Remember, she offered Kenny a choice of saying, like, hey, what do you think could work? He responded, I just want people to leave me alone. Well, Miss S's responsibility was to bring those suggestions, right? What if she didn't bring anything? She's kind of stuck. Megan, you're saying your responsibility is to kind of admit the errors, right? So that if I make a mistake, like Miss W did, in that second scenario,
Mm-hmm.
we've all been there, right? Sometimes we go there with students, and that's a difficult moment. But if we do, it's apologizing.
Absolutely.
Right? It's finding the time to say, I'm really sorry I did that. I shouldn't have called you out in front of the class. And that's sometimes when more of the, like, we haven't talked about this a lot, but more of the traditional restorative justice, like repairing the harm, can come in. There are probably a few things that Miss W could do to repair the harm with Fernanda, right?
But with that responsibility, she's creating hopefulness. So once you apologize to a student, which is something they might not even be used to from adults in general, you create hopefulness that I can't, when something is wrong and adults are to blame or responsible, they can apologize, and that's okay. So it's creating this hopeful spirit that will also bridge the gap between you guys and give you that respect, because they know that you're giving it to them. This person apologized to me. That's the ultimate sign of respecting me. So I'm going to be able to, in the future, kind of bridge that gap with them before even going there.
Absolutely. Liz also suggested in her comment is finding out how they define respect, because everyone defines respect differently, and figuring out what their approach is. And oftentimes kids don't get asked that a lot.
They don't.
So, wait, you want to know what I think? Oh, okay, right.
And that could even be a bell ringer. That could take 5 minutes to,
I like it.
What is respect to you? And then you guys can go around in a circle and everyone can. And so you kind of have especially your tougher students, you might want to pay attention, kind of what do they feel like is respect?
Absolutely. So we're kind of wrapping up here as we go through the discussion. We've gotten a few general questions, so I want to get to those. But keep typing in those responses. If you have questions about trauma-informed care, restorative justice, anything we've talked about, feel free to type those into there as well. We do have evaluation that I'll put in the chat. And so you can find that, but I want to take some of your questions that were more general. So let me find them. Those were all like really great ideas people had for how they would connect with certain students. So this question more generally is, what do you do if every student in the class has trauma and students don't follow directions even when told quietly and respectfully, because the last 5 teachers have basically given up and let them do what they want? We're with you, Brenda. This is a difficult situation, but I think that we've all been there, and we understand, right, from the trauma perspective, that students have seen teachers come and go.
Absolutely.
Whether it's subs, whether it's other caregivers in their lives. So the first part is really understanding, well, why would these students have difficulty trusting me? There is some like classroom management portion of this, is how can I, what are other strategies I have to get students to, form a community, respond to directions that don't include raising my voice. Right. So whether it's clapping, we used to do a lot of like patterns on the table, right, to get everyone quiet. Because sometimes we find, well, I asked them quietly and respectfully and they didn't do it, right? Okay, so what other strategies do I have in my toolkit? But I also think Brittany had some great suggestions of, one, acknowledging that if there are other teachers in the past, or if it's current teachers, maybe a little more difficult, are kind of letting them do what they want. Okay, how are we going to come back together as a community and use some of those restorative justice principles of what do we want as a community?
Absolutely. How
are we defining respect?
Absolutely.
Anything you would want to add to that, Brittany? You had kind of brought that up earlier in the webinar.
Absolutely. And the beauty of it is, despite what 4th and 5th period teachers are doing, the 6th period, that is your classroom. And so in that classroom, you can cultivate your own rules and have them join in. You can create a different sense of community in that particular classroom. It's been students that they look forward to a certain classroom because they know when they come in, maybe that first 5 minutes, they're going to meditate, or they know that it's going to be a discussion question on how their day went, some type of check-in at the beginning. helps kids kind of regulate throughout the class, because a lot of times kids are trying to just get that energy off. And so they use the whole class period for that, which we could kind of get that off in the beginning. And sometimes I know it's tight, you know, we only have maybe 30 minutes or 40 minutes in the class, but it will make the difference in the remainder of the minutes that you have if you dedicate maybe that first 5 minutes to regulating your classroom. So like I said, stuff like meditation, if you guys want to do like a circle or something where you guys kind of just talk about what transpired during the day, or just have everybody check in with one word, and that way it can go back quick, but you can kind of see where everyone is. My teacher in high school used to have us do fist bumps when we came in the classroom,
Yeah.
but he could tell by how unenthusiastic we were to greet him if we were in a mood or not. And so he kind of dealt with us on that level. But finding ways in the beginning of your classroom time to kind of get that energy out for the kids.
Absolutely. Yeah, great question. And yeah, I think there are a few suggestions. The other thing is just be patient.
Absolutely.
Come in day after day. They'll notice, show them love, show them compassion. It will make a difference, but like we didn't mention this before, but it takes time to build relationships. And that's with everyone, not just with young people. So give it time, invest in it, continue to invest in it. When there are harms, make sure you repair them and provide students opportunities to repair them in their own way. Sometimes they don't repair like we want them to, but find a way that they are comfortable with. And hold in there. You're doing everything right. So I put the survey in the chat box. I hope everyone got that. Just want to thank everyone for participating today. We definitely asked a lot of you as participants, but hopefully the more interaction was helpful. We did get a question about if you missed the first of the series, if you could get the recording. If you just give me, send me an email. I've put my email at the end of the PowerPoint. Let me see if I can get that back up there. You can just send me an email and I'll send you the recording. It may be, sometimes it gets posted on our website, but I'm not 100% sure if it's there. If you're a certified teacher and are looking for CPDUs or PD clock hours, also email me your certification number, and whichever ones you attend in the series, you have to be in the webinar at the time we broadcast it for you to get CPDUs, because I have to be able to, say you're signed in. Then I'll give you the CPDUs at the end of the series for all three or whichever ones you attended. So just go ahead and email me your name. Obviously, I'll have your name and then your IEN number, which is your certification number for your education certificate. I think that's it. Well, thanks, Brittany, for joining us.
Well, thank you guys for having me.
Hopefully this was an interesting kind of conversation between trauma-informed perspective, being a trauma-informed educator, and also bringing some restorative justice principles in that don't look as typical, but kind of in the everyday interactions and conversations, kind of how we can kind of live those out.
Absolutely.
So everyone have a good night, get home safe, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Nice.